This is from the wet and wet blend technique video, and so this is what you do when if you've done something and you think, well, that could be a little bolder or a little bit more gradated. So what we're going to do is I'm mixing up the ultramarine blue and burnt sienna, and we want it to be blue, not neutral. So we can always pull that out, and so that's still pretty neutral, so we're going to add a little bit more of the blue in there. And the one nice thing about a glaze that's dark is this will not show up on the trees. It's only going to show up on the lighter colors. If we had added white to that, that would start showing up. So we're just going to run that band along the bottom. Not that different than what we do when we're doing the wet and wet blend. Then we clean the brush and we squeeze out most of the water. I just do that with my fingers scissored, and then you put the brush half on, half off, and you just go back and forth until you see that blur. Clean the brush often, and you have lots of time to do this because you're adding water. You just don't want to let that dry on you. So anytime you clean the brush, you start again at the top. And so we're going to bring that down and smooth that out. And so squeezing again, starting at the top and bringing that down, gradually creating that blended look. And so then what we're going to do is we're going to get a dry brush. Now, if you look closely, you can see that the glaze is going into the texture of the canvas, and that's a sign that it's pretty wet. So we take a dry brush and we just go back and forth over that, and that will lift it out of the texture. And we can go back and forth, smoothing that out. And then we'll say that's done. So this is the two-color blend from our blending video. And what we're going to do that's a little different in the glaze is here we're just going to darken the whole thing. Not the whole thing, but the whole water. And again, we have the trees down. Now, this glaze may impact the lighter color on the trees. And so one of the reasons that I did this, because you could do this glaze ahead of time before you put the trees in, but I like to show you that you can put these glazes in any time and you don't fret that you have to repaint something that's relatively easy to repaint. So we're going to get this a lot thinner rather. I should try to finish my sentences. And so I'm toying with the idea of whether or not to put a masking tape down, but I think we can do this just so. That was just adding more water to the glaze, and so we are just trying to get a fairly even coat. It's going to even out. You can see it's starting to pool into the texture again, but that's not something. That's a good sign. It's a sign that you've got a lot of water down there, but that means that you have time to play with it. So we're now going to switch to a dry brush, and this dry brush is going to lift it out of the texture. And it also lifts up some of the glaze. So you can just, the more you work this, the more glaze that you're lifting off. And so you can look at it just to see, we just generally wanted to darken that water. Got some little speck down there. And so what we've done is we've just put a light glaze over the whole thing, and we can still see the blend underneath, but we've just sort of darkened the water a little bit, which can often happen. And so I'm just going to use a wet paper towel to lift off some of that glaze. This is the orange into blue wet and wet, so that the orange did experience quite a bit of desaturation. I did have the error of actually using a dirty brush, so that desaturated a bit more. But what we're going to do now is we're just going to show you some wind lines. And so wind lines are just where the water hits, or the wind hits the water, and creates a change in the lighting in that particular spot. So generally they are reflecting the sky behind. So this is a zinc white that I'm using, and zinc white is very much more transparent than your average titanium white. Although you can make titanium white glaze just by getting it thinner. It's just maybe a little easier to do it with zinc white. I'm going to mix some blue. I'm going to use a little bit of titanium white lower down. And I'm giving it a little bit of a blue tint, possibly a bit more than what we've got there. Zinc white is often referred to as mixing white because it doesn't take a lot of pigment to change the color. Where we'll just repaint those trees. And so and we'll let that dry, and then we'll hit it again with another glaze. So we've allowed that first glaze to dry, and now we're just going to darken the bottom one a little bit as well. You can see that's going into the texture a bit. So we've got a nice dry brush. and we lift that paint right out of the texture. Now, the more you work this, the more you're going to take off the base color that you do, or the glaze color. But that's, you can do this multiple times. If you end up taking more than you wanted off, or you haven't put down enough, you can do that all again. So we're going to do some very thin line glazes, which are going to look fairly opaque. But it's still the same thin consistency. I think we need a little bit more white in that. We'll maybe use a combination of the whiter one and the bluer one on one side. So I'm just going to get a dry brush and blur those a little bit. Lifting a little bit more off the top there to get some of that orange back. So this one, we are going to, this is the orange into a dry blue, so it's a lot more saturated, but we're just going to lighten the whole portion, but we're not going to use the straight white. We're going to use a slightly bluer, well, quite a bit bluer, but we're going to do this evenly over the whole thing. And we're using titanium white here. It's sometimes a little easier to just do this with zinc white. And as long as you keep this wet, you can keep working it. But if you let it dry, you're going to be done. So you can see that I definitely need to take more off out of that orange area. So I'm just re-wetting the whole thing. And then I'm going to get a dry brush, which is going to lift a lot more of this off. We'll probably have to use a couple of dry brushes because I had that pretty wet. Don't seem to have missed putting some down the bottom there. So we're going to be putting the wind lines on this painting. This painting is 6 feet wide. And we're going to be using the KX9 10,000. And we're going to be working from the bottom side initially. So we've got this on the, I don't really need to put that on there as we're not working too energetically. So we've got the piece to raise this end, and this the KX9 10,000 has a number of holes so that I can position this where I need it. So we're going to go in the last hole. This one we are going to put on. And so this is just a piece of hardwood that I have varnished, and I varnished it just so that the acrylic paint can come off more easily, because the acrylic paint can create bumps along the leading edge, which we're going to be using this bottom edge. So we're going to position that up near the top, because we're going to be running our brush along this edge here. And so what the KX9 10,000 is going to do is it's going to allow us to paint quite a straight line. So I think that should be okay. So we're using zinc white because it's much more transparent. And you can do this with titanium white, but because of the length of these bands we're going to be doing, where we want that little extra chance to get that transparent. So this first line we're going to do is a little bit on the dark side. It's on the far shore. So I'm just going to make sure I've got enough paint. When you're mixing with zinc white, you need to be careful that you are not going too heavy with the colors, because it definitely does not take a lot of pigments to change the color. This is one of the reasons it's called mixing white. Back in the time when the pigments were more expensive, they would use zinc white so that they wouldn't have to use as much of the more expensive pigments. I don't know anyone that does that now. Okay, so we're going to lay down the first color. We've mixed up a medium gray using burnt sienna, ultramarine blue, and the zinc white. So we're laying this first coat down. And you do not worry about going on the landmass. We will repaint that landmass. I think I'm going to make that just a little bit darker. So we're going to get just a clean brush that's wet, and I'm just going to soften that bottom edge a little bit. I'm going to reposition this. So this end we lift up so that we're not dragging it through the paint. This end we can slide. So we're going pretty light here. I'm trying to make sure that's relatively straight. So I've got the brush turned sideways. So we're going to get our clean brush again. So we want to get this end sort of fading. That's pretty good. So now we're just going to and we'll slide this out of the way. I'm going to start working on the top edge now, partly because I can reach a little bit more easily. I'm just going to soften the top edge of that a little bit. And so we want to build this slowly. We can do multiple passes to see that we're getting what we want. I think we're going to get a thin one just below that one. And remember to clean the brush when you're trying to fade an end. Make sure you catch any drips that you do make. Not that we couldn't fix them, but why make more work for yourself? This one we're going to do on the top side, but we're bringing it all the way through. So I need to move this end. So this is on the top side, and that's the reason that there's two bolts there. So you can choose where to put that. So we're just making sure that's, so we're just going to make sure that that's relatively straight. Reload the brush, and like I say, this time we're going right to the end. Takes a little bit more paint when we're going over the dark area. I don't know what that is. So we're just going to soften the top edge there. And make sure you work on the edge that you painted first, just because the acrylic can dry pretty fast. We're going to slide that down. We're not too worried about a mark like that because we're going to be painting over it. going to use a much wider wet brush so we can blend more of that at the same time. This is a 3-inch Aquamaster. So we're going to add some blue, ultramarine blue to the mix, because down the bottom there, it's a little bit on the blue side. So even these little subtle color differences can make a big difference to your painting. This one we're not taking right. I think I want to make that a little bluer. You always have to compensate for the transparency and the influence of the colors underneath. We hit a little bit of yellow there. I'm just going to put another very careful there. I'm not too worried about that side because there will be a lot of micro ripples that we put in over there. So I'm going to use that wide brush again just to smooth the blue out. I turned the brush as I was doing to create that little bit of a streak there. That was intentional. So we're likely going to hit a lot of this again, but not until it dries. So I just want to look at the bottom. So I think we're just going to switch this back to the other side. I'm going to slide it just up to there. I don't want to go past that. So this time we're going to add a little bit of burnt sienna into that. This is a little bit heavy. So I've mixed up a darker tone to do the bottom here, so Sorry if you can't see that much, but I'm just going to move that up. So we're just going to soften that top edge a little bit. And so if it doesn't seem to be moving at first, just work at it a bit. Sometimes it's just had a little too long to dry. If you can't move it at all, then you can try and fix it on another layer. This is definitely, we're going to hit that twice, but I think that's looking fairly good. I think we're going to extend that a little bit, but a little bit into the bluer side. So we've got a couple of blemishes there that will smooth out a little bit. Like I say, we're going to give that another coat, so we're not too concerned about that. So we're using straight zinc white here now. And I'm using a filbert. It doesn't really make a huge difference because what brush you're using to lay down that paint, because we're going to be going over it again with a 1-inch wide Aquamaster just to bleed it. I'm going to take this a little bit farther into the dark. I think I'll just put a little bit more paint down there. So now we're going to get that clean, wet brush. Squeeze it out between the fingers to get most of the moisture out. You don't want to add too much water at this point. So this is clean, so we'll just... And so what you're seeing, bloody hell. What you're seeing at the end is not necessarily paint. Some of it is just foam or water that will dry pretty much clear. Well, we're just going to drop this down a bit. It's much better to do these gradually than try to do it all in one shot. We get a much more transparent. I think we will eventually put another one up there, but I'm gonna wait until a little bit later, and I think we're going to add another one just below that one. Oh, it looks like we got part of one there. Anyway, so again, straight white. Not going to come in quite so deep. Bloody hell. That wasn't good. Just going to soften the end of this one. We're going to be using some yellow ochre and white in this midsection after, but I want to get this quite a bit whiter yet. So we're back to our wide brush, and we're not going to bring the white all the way into the center there. I'm going to try and get a little bit more white happening in the central area here, tailing off at the end. Just going to bring that down again, pick up some more white. We're going to use our wide brush again to smooth that rather rough application of paint out. Got some contamination in there, which is never good. I don't know where those little bits of shit are coming from, but so we're now coming in with yellow ochre and white, and we're just going to add that extra one at the top. That's pretty wet, so I'm going to try a straight dry brush here, which doesn't take quite as much off. Quite a bit wider than what I wanted, so we're going to see if we can't take some of that out. Get some fresh paper towels. So to take things off, you need to wet that brush fairly frequently and wipe the paint off the brush. So that's looking a little bit better. We're going to put the yellow ochre on there. Getting it heavier right here where the sky is definitely more open. And this time we are going right through that section. Well, I cleaned that off the palette, obviously not. I want to put a little more just in this central section. So I'm switching to the KX9-200 just because the paint is wet. I could wait to do this,